The maintenance bay smelled faintly of ozone and oil, an aroma that somehow felt like home to me, though I would have sworn it gave most people a mild panic attack. I was crouched behind a half-dismantled gravity pump, balancing a wrench on my knee like it was a delicate artifact, when the corridor lights flickered in a peculiar pattern, almost like Morse code. I muttered under my breath, if that's the station telling me it's about to explode, a little warning would have been nice. Of course, it wasn't the station. It never was. She appeared then as if the lights themselves had conspired to introduce her. My first thought was absurdly pedestrian. She looks human. Not exactly human, of course. Her ears were long, arching gracefully from the sides of her head, twitching slightly when she tilted her gaze toward me, but almost human. The kind of almost that makes you forget to breathe because your brain is busy recalculating everything it knows about biology. Her eyes, a shade of green that seemed to shift like sunlight through liquid, were fixed on me, curious but patient. She moved with an elegance that made my knees feel suddenly wooden. Hello," I said, which sounded weaker than it had in my head. Gravity pumps didn't have small talk, but I figured I could wing it. She cocked her head, one ear flicking like a radar dish catching a stray signal. "Hello," she said, her voice soft, musical, but with a clarity that carried the weight of someone used to thinking long thoughts in empty spaces. She stepped closer, examining the floating tools I had scattered across the floor. I panicked slightly and tried to gather them, sending a wrench spinning into the air. It floated lazily, as if enjoying the attention. She reached out and caught it mid-arc without looking, and I had to remind myself to stop gaping. "You have a very chaotic system," she said, tilting her head again. The ear on the left side of her head flicked in a way I would later learn indicated amusement. "I prefer creative," I muttered, straightening up and wiping my hands on my jumpsuit. "It's an engineering philosophy. Chaos builds character or something like that." She smiled, a slight curve of her lips that suggested she understood the joke, or at least found it oddly human. That was my first clue that her species appreciated humor, which immediately made me like her more. Humor is a survival skill after all, and if she had it, that meant she could survive my awkwardness. I offered her the wrench, thinking it might be a proper gesture of civility. She shook her head and handed it back with a delicate, almost theatrical flick of her fingers. "I do not require this tool," she said. I tried not to let my disappointment show, but it did anyway. My plan to impress an alien woman with a floating wrench had failed spectacularly. "Then, do you like flowers?" I asked, before realizing how ridiculous I must sound. Flowers in zero gravity, in a maintenance bay. I might as well have asked her if she preferred poetry written in coolant leaks. Her ears twitched sharply at the question and her eyes sparkled. "Flowers," she repeated. "Explain." I dug into my pocket and pulled out a hollow projector. A small flower unfurled in midair, petals spinning gently as if in a breeze. "It's pretty, harmless, smells like happiness, at least according to our sensors." I braced myself for her reaction. She studied it carefully, her long fingers hovering inches from the light projection as though she were touching something real. "It is intriguing," she said finally. Then she laughed. Not a loud, boisterous laugh, but a soft, melodic sound that filled the small bay in a way that made me forget the hum of machinery and floating tools. "You offered this to me." Her eyes narrowed in mock suspicion, ears flicking with an almost childlike curiosity. "Yes," I admitted, scratching the back of my neck. "I thought it might, be nice." Her gaze softened, and for a moment I was convinced she might actually explode with sheer delight. Then she flicked an ear, gestured toward the hollow flower, and suddenly the projection multiplied. 10 flowers floated in a perfect circle around us, spinning and spinning until the air shimmered with colors I didn't even know the sensors could detect. I stumbled back a step. "Oh, okay, I didn't expect that." She laughed again, and the sound bounced off the walls, rich and alive, making me feel like I had just passed some invisible interstellar test. "You are peculiar, human, but I think I like you." The compliment was simple, but it struck me harder than a micrometeor hitting the outer hull. The bay alarm buzzed in the background, reminding me that, yes, life-threatening mechanical failures still existed, but somehow it didn't feel urgent. I had bigger problems, or maybe better ones, sitting in front of me, laughing softly and spinning holographic flowers like they were the most natural thing in the universe. Do you want to maybe see the rest of the station?" I asked, trying to regain some dignity. "I mean, the tour isn't very exciting, mostly storage rooms and broken lights, but I can make it sound exciting." She tilted her head again, the left ear twitching upward in amusement. "I find your enthusiasm entertaining. Lead the way, human." And so we moved through the corridors of the station, her presence somehow making even the fluorescent flicker feel like part of an adventure. I explained things poorly, she asked clever questions, and somehow, between floating wrenches, laughter, and inexplicable holographic flowers, a connection began to form. Not the dramatic, universe-shaking kind that makes headlines, but the quiet, fragile kind that makes you feel like you've discovered something rare and precious in the infinite expanse of space. By the time we reached the observation deck where the stars stretched endlessly beyond the glass, she paused. Her fingers lightly traced the air and her ears twitched in patterns I didn't yet understand. I held my breath. The hollow flower hovered between us, spinning slowly, casting prismatic light across her face. She smiled at me, a small, knowing smile that made my chest tighten. "You gave me this," she said softly, "and it is enjoyable." I wanted to respond with some clever quip, but my voice had betrayed me hours ago in the maintenance bay. Instead, I simply smiled back. In the endless void outside, among stars older than time itself, two beings, one human, one almost human, stood quietly, connected by a small, inconsequential gift that somehow meant everything. And somewhere deep in the station, a gravity pump hummed on, oblivious to the beginnings of an interstellar friendship that would, somehow, survive floating wrenches, sarcastic comments, and probably a lot more improbable adventures. We drifted through the station like two small boats on a vast, metallic ocean. She had a habit of tilting her head, ears swiveling like antennae picking up invisible signals, and I caught myself half expecting her to start translating the hum of the power conduits into poetry. I offered her a seat in the lounge, though seat was relative. The gravity modulators sometimes decided to take naps, and the chairs floated lazily like cloud fragments. She perched herself on one, crossing her legs with an elegance that made me feel clumsy just by comparison. "Humans seem to enjoy sitting in boxes," she observed, glancing at the armrest that had drifted 3 centimeters to the left and refused to stay put. "Is this comfortable?" "Mostly," I said, attempting a shrug. One shoulder went up, the other stayed suspiciously low. "Sort of like floating on a mattress made of molasses, you get used to it." She tilted her head and her ears twitched. I guess that translated roughly to amusement. We talked about trivial things first. The temperature settings of the station, the taste of replicated coffee, which, by the way, I warned her was better than toxic sludge but not by much, and my ill-fated attempt to grow a tiny herb garden in zero gravity. She asked questions, some sharp, some funny, and some that made me realize she was cataloging human behavior with a precision that would make an anthropologist weep with envy. "You plant greenery in a room without soil," she said, raising an eyebrow, though technically she didn't have eyebrows. The left side of her mouth quirked upward. "This is curious." "It's gardening," I said, "or something like it. It's therapeutic." Though I admit, the basil floating into the coolant vents was less so. She laughed at that. The sound had a strange gravity to it, light enough to lift my spirits, heavy enough to anchor my attention. I caught myself smiling, realizing that I hadn't laughed like this in weeks, maybe months. A sudden alarm sounded, the station's internal security system reminding us that life still had bureaucratic rules, even in the middle of space. The lights flickered and the gravity modulators hiccuped. I grabbed her hand reflexively, which I instantly regretted as the chair began to drift backward. She squeaked, a sound that was almost adorable, and I lunged to push the chair toward the wall. We collided in a tangle of limbs and floating clothing, and somewhere in the chaos, a cup of replicated coffee performed a perfect arc before landing neatly on the console, untouched. We both froze, staring at the cup, then at each other. "Well," I said finally, "we're not dead. I consider that a win." Her ears twitched sharply and she laughed again, a little louder this time. "You humans are clumsy, yet persistent." "Clumsy is my specialty," I admitted. "Persistence comes for free if you survive long enough." She tilted her head, her gaze tracking the gentle drift of a stray tool nearby. "This station is unstable, yet you navigate it with a strange competence. I find this entertaining." By now, my nervousness had faded into a comfortable rhythm. We moved through the corridors, her fingers brushing the touch panels and hovering over displays with a delicate curiosity, and I found myself explaining the quirks of human technology with increasingly ridiculous analogies. The airlock control panel became a metallic puzzle box designed by slightly sadistic engineers, and the food replicator was a magic oven that occasionally produces disappointment flavored as lasagna. She chuckled each time, her ears flicking like twin compasses, and I realized that I could make a joke at my own expense without dying from embarrassment, a first in a long time. Later, we stopped near the observation deck again, where the stars stretched into infinity. I leaned against the rail, trying to appear nonchalant as I watched her watch the cosmos. Her ears twitched with every subtle vibration in the station, every flicker of distant lights, and I realized she was absorbing everything: the hum of the engines, the starlight reflecting off the hull, even the faint pulse of my nervous heartbeat. "You seem attentive," I said, unsure if I sounded foolish or insightful. "I observe," she replied. "Your species is noisy, emotion is loud yet delicate, fascinating." I laughed. "Noisy, I suppose that's one way to put it." She tilted her head again, studying me in a way that made me feel simultaneously analyzed and appreciated. I had a sudden, absurd thought that if aliens cataloged human errors, I would be a star exhibit. But she didn't mock me. Instead, she reached toward the hollow flower I still carried in my pocket. With a gentle wave, the petals unfurled, floating in a slow dance above our heads. "They respond to thought?" she asked, eyes wide. "How?" "They're programmed to react to human attention," I said. "Basically, I think about them, they spin, works every time except when I forget and they droop, which, yeah, not great for morale." Her ears twitched sharply and she laughed softly. "This is delightful. I did not anticipate such whimsy." For the first time, I noticed her long fingers brushing through the light projections, bending the holographic petals with a precision that suggested playful experimentation. She tilted her head back, ears angled like radar, and the entire display shimmered with subtle colors, some I didn't have names for. "You enjoy simple things," she said finally, her tone almost contemplative. "This small gesture, it carries meaning. I did not expect emotion from such smallness." "I think humans do that a lot," I said, shrugging, though my shoulders floated awkwardly without gravity keeping them in check. "We like to overcomplicate things, then call it meaningful. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's just floating flowers." She studied me, eyes narrowing slightly, then nodded, her ears flicking in a pattern I still couldn't decode. "You care." "I understand." The station shuddered faintly, a reminder that the universe outside was indifferent, but inside this small bubble of artificial gravity and flickering lights, nothing else mattered. We talked quietly, our conversation drifting from trivialities to shared laughter, punctuated by small alarms and accidental collisions with floating tools. I realized that humor was our bridge, allowing us to cross the gulf between species without speaking directly of the complexities of emotion. By the time we paused near the botanical bay, a place where plants grew in microgravity, I felt a strange sense of calm. She reached out to touch a floating vine, her long ears twitching in thought, and I realized she was beginning to understand the subtleties of human gestures, the way we communicated meaning in small, almost invisible ways. "You gave me this," she said softly, pointing toward the hollow flower still orbiting gently above us. "And I feel something unexpected, curiosity, pleasure, perhaps affection." I laughed because that sounded ridiculous coming from an alien woman with ears longer than my entire arm. "Yeah, I think that's the idea, but mostly I just want it to be nice." She tilted her head again, smiling faintly. "It is effective." And so we stood there, surrounded by drifting leaves and holographic petals, two beings from different worlds connected by laughter, curiosity, and a single, small gift that had spun unexpectedly into the first threads of understanding. In the infinite darkness beyond the station's windows, the stars continued their silent dance, unaware that down here, in this small, floating corner of the galaxy, a human and an alien were discovering the strange, fragile joy of companionship. The station was unusually quiet that morning, as though it too were holding its breath for what was about to unfold. I was in the hydroponics bay, hovering awkwardly while adjusting the nutrient flow to the lettuce pods, when I heard the soft hum of her boots, or at least, what passed for boots in zero gravity against the metallic floor. She appeared at the entrance, ears flicking with that precise rhythm that had become a language all its own. I waved, spilling a tiny droplet of water into the air that floated like a suspended crystal, and she tilted her head, amused. "Human," she said, voice playful, "you are fascinating in your chaos." "I try," I replied, catching a floating lettuce leaf before it could strike the wall, mostly unintentionally. She stepped closer, letting her long ears trace arcs through the air, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. That small gift, the hollow flower, was still with me, orbiting lazily above my head like it had never left. I realized I had been carrying it around for days, not because I expected anything to happen, but because giving it to her had changed something fundamental in me. I had always been the kind of person to hide behind routines, to fix things and avoid risks, and now here I was, feeling like the universe itself had expanded just a little. "You carry that still," she said, nodding at the floating flower. Her eyes were curious, measuring but gentle. "Why?" "Habit, maybe," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "Or maybe I wanted you to have it when you were ready." She smiled, the curve of her lips almost impossible to read, and then she did something unexpected. She extended a hand toward the flower and with a delicate wave of her fingers caused it to multiply, spinning into a small galaxy of petals that danced around us. The colors shifted in patterns that the station's sensors didn't even recognize. I stared, mesmerized. "You do not understand," she said, her ears twitching in a pattern that seemed almost musical. "This gesture, small, human, and yet powerful. I feel gratitude, curiosity, amusement, and perhaps even something akin to fondness." "Fondness," I echoed, choking slightly on the word and immediately worried I sounded ridiculous. "Yes," she said, tilting her head. "It is rare for my kind to experience such nuanced emotion from an unfamiliar species. Your care has created a bridge." I laughed nervously because I had no idea if she was teasing me or speaking seriously. "A bridge, huh? I was just hoping I didn't look like a fool." She chuckled, ears flicking sharply in what I had come to recognize as her version of amusement. "Perhaps a fool," she said, "but a charming one." I did not anticipate laughter or connection. "You are unexpected." For a long while we floated there, the hydroponics lights casting prismed reflections on her face as the flower petals spun around us. I realized that my life had shifted subtly but irreversibly. I had always believed that my actions were small, isolated, insignificant, yet this tiny gesture had opened something profound. Perhaps humans weren't so fragile after all. Perhaps small acts carried with honesty and humor could matter more than any technical achievement. I began hesitating. I didn't think it would mean anything. I just wanted to be nice. "That," she said softly, reaching out so our fingers almost touched, "is precisely why it matters, because it was sincere." And then the station gave us a reminder of its ever-present chaos. The gravity modulators hiccuped, sending us both spinning gently upward. I flailed, trying to catch a vine that had escaped its hydroponic pod, and she laughed, her ears flaring in a way that made the sound almost musical. Somehow, in the middle of floating plants and spinning petals, the moment became lighter, warmer. "I think," I said, laughing as I steadied myself, "I like the way you laugh, even if it makes me panic a little." Her eyes softened. "And I enjoy the way you navigate instability. You adapt, you persist." She tilted her head further, ears brushing softly against the air like they were tasting it. "Perhaps we are not so different after all." Hours passed, though in space hours are always suspect. We drifted from the hydroponics bay to the observation deck, following the hum of the station as if it were a river guiding us downstream. Outside, stars spilled across the void in constellations I had never seen, constellations that seemed to bend toward us, curious about our small drama of flowers, laughter, and the silent recognition between two beings. "You have changed," she said finally, voice quiet. "Before you offered the gift, you were cautious, afraid of being insignificant. Now you demonstrate confidence, perhaps hope." I swallowed, feeling the weight of her observation. "I guess you could say I learned that sometimes small things matter more than I think, and maybe taking a risk isn't so scary if it's worth it." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Worth it," she repeated, as if testing the phrase on her tongue. "I am pleased." Then, with a flick of her fingers, the hollow flowers danced together into a single spiral, projecting a constellation-like pattern into the air. It was a simple gesture, playful and elegant, and yet I felt as if the universe itself had conspired to bless it. You know, I said, letting the tension slip, we probably make a terrible team for serious station emergencies, but for this, I think we're perfect. She tilted her head, ears flicking sharply, and laughed, a sound so rich it felt like it filled every empty corner of the station. Perhaps, she said, but perfection is overrated. Chaos humor connection, these are rare treasures. As we floated there amidst spinning petals, flickering lights, and stars older than any living memory,